Welcome back. This time it was one spot. Some of you might remember a couple of years ago we had the Swiss weatherman, Thomas Bucherli, talking about the weather. We also had, and I think a year later on, this funny person from the Wetterschmöcker having the presentation about weather and the forecasting based on natural phenomena. Meanwhile, the discussion is not about the weather, but it's about climate. And please listen to Rodrigo Amandi talking about climate change goes digital. Something which will be on our daily business line for a long time in the future, I would guess. Rodrigo, the stage is yours. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure being here. It's the first time that I do participate in a digital event. So I appreciate having people at the other side of the line. So thanks a lot for the staying put. What I wanted to bring today are two mega trends that seem to be disconnected, but somehow we should try to connect. One of them is digitalization. Everyone talks about digitalization in financial services, and there is a lot going on. That is undoubtedly the case. But when we talk about climate change, it seems to be that this is something else that doesn't necessarily apply to or is totally disconnected from this other mega trend of digitalization. So what I will try to do today is try to show you an example of how you could bring these two huge topics together. And I'll show you a practical example of how we have been managing and dealing with these two topics into our application. As Frank mentioned, my name is Rodrigo Amandi, and I am the co-founder and chief operating officer of Third Eyes Analytics. Third Eyes Analytics is a Swiss-based company, actually headquartered here in Zurich. What we do is we actually develop software that empowers wealth and insurance advisors to provide the most individual and realistic forecast of people's life and wealth development over time. And this obviously includes externalities such as climate change. Obviously, COVID could be another one. But here, let's focus on the topic of climate change. So obviously, to provide this type of advice, we consume a lot of data. And this is also something that I will try to bring across. How do we actually source that data, crunch that data, and deliver it to our clients so then they can provide the best investment recommendations to the clients? Now, I'm not alone in this company. I just introduced myself briefly. So we have also our CEO and co-founder, Stephanie Veit, who comes from the institutional asset management world and also has extensive experience in the topic of sustainable investing. She was part of the Rodrigo Amandi executive team for a few years. She was also the co-CEO of the company. I will not say a few more words about myself, just to say that I've been also a part of the sustainable investing world during my period at the Rodrigo Amandi as well. We also have Mark Mettler in our team heading the business development, our chief technology officer, who's been able to aggregate these two trends that I was just talking about before. Then we have our brain behind crunching all that data and making these models that I will show you later on possible. So then people can actually evaluate what the actual impact of climate change on their wealth. And finally, we have our chief financial officer, Mark Yuan. So a brief introduction about our company. I mentioned that we are based here in Zurich. The company was founded 5 years ago, around this time, in 2015. We currently have clients on our platform or that use our platform to provide investment advice to their clients. We have roughly 20 employees. We have been awarded and recognized various times, and we are generating around €1 million for this year. And again, we are growing the interest of the type of services that we provide in a continuous basis, and we have over 500 prospects in our potential client list. On the right-hand side, you see a few of the names that we actually either work with because they are our clients or because we source data from. There are two examples that might be familiarized to you. So Financial Express Funding Fund, Morningstar, and I will show you a couple of examples of how do we access to their interfaces and extract data for our purposes. Now, let's go to the topic. Climate change is something that is probably today undeniable for pretty much everyone. I say pretty much because there are still some people that do not believe that the world is getting warmer. But here, you have some expectations on what will happen in the next 5 years. So there is 20% chance that the world get a little bit warmer, well, a little bit 1.5 degrees warmer. This is probably short of what we are probably going to be experiencing if we look at all the sources. For example, here you have Schroders, one of the largest asset management companies in the world. They look at 12 different indicators. And basically, they track the development of what our promises have been, or our political agenda has been in various fronts, and where are we actually in that agenda that we define. So you can see the trajectories that we are going to be hitting, best case scenario around the 3 degree, if not 4 degree, as opposed to probably 1.5 or 2, that this is what people tend to think we will end up with. Now, despite this huge growth, or the huge growth in temperature and the impact that it will have, very few organizations within the financial sector are actually evaluating what the actual impact of climate change is or will be for their clients. This is just some data that we gathered from the UNPRI. This is the United Nations Principle for Responsible Investing. I think probably you are pretty much all familiarized with this organization, so I will not spare words on this. But it's basically it is alarming, the fact that despite being recognized as a major topic and the severe impacts that it will have on the economy, yet very few actually take it into consideration. Now, if we look a little bit deeper into the topic, climate change is definitely something that people should be worried about. And here we are not just talking about financial organizations only, but actually us ourselves, consumers, because we consume products from these organizations. And we as investors, we do have two options. Either we change our investment behavior, meaning that we probably will have to take more risk to achieve with our wealth what we think that we could achieve today. And this is the case because it is clear that climate change does have a negative impact on GDP, meaning that if you want to reach certain wealth volume or you have certain financial targets in your life, to reach those in a scenario where temperatures will be higher than today, you are prone to take more risk to actually achieve what you want to achieve. We also can mitigate it. That means that we can shift our investments from a non-sustainable to a sustainable approach, meaning that obviously with your money being put at work, you can reduce the impact or decrease the speed at which this increase in temperature will happen over time. These two approaches are not mutually exclusive. So that means that investors, so ourselves, can change our investment behavior, and at the same time we can mitigate the impact of climate change by shifting our assets from a non-sustainable to a sustainable approach. Undeniably, also, climate change does have a direct impact on GDP. There are various studies about it that we will go through in a couple of slides. They definitely have an impact on asset returns. And obviously, if this has an impact on those asset returns, it means that our financial goals, meaning, for example, your pension, how much money do you expect to get when you get retired, will not be probably the same as what you think it will be. Now, what's the current status quo? Well, policymakers worldwide are looking at a manageable situation of a 2-degree scenario. This is obviously a likely scenario, but as I showed you before, it could well be that we are well beyond the 2-degree and we end up with a 3 or 4 degrees or God knows where. So obviously there are many different and several outcomes of global warming, and the impact on the economy could be extremely diverse to evaluate what a 2-degree scenario will be, even a 4, but we don't have a lot of data to really portray what could happen going forward. And one of the major difficulties, and this is why these two trends of digitalization and climate change have not actually coming together, is the difficulty for people, so ourselves, to grasp what the real impact of this topic is on us, on ourselves. One clear example could be on our pension whenever we get retired. So 3 major academic models that look at or evaluate what the impact of climate change or rising temperatures are on GDP. 3 models that I will have to read because I do not know the names by heart. So we have the DICE model, which is a dynamic integrated model of climate and economy. This was developed by Nordhaus and Nobel laureate, and this was developed in 2010. We have the FUND, which is a climate framework for uncertainty, negotiation, and distribution, developed in 2014 by Toll and Anthoff. And then we have also the PAGE, which is the policy assessment on greenhouse effects. This was developed in 2009 by Hope. Regardless of what these models do you prefer or do you like best, they all predict a nonlinear effect. What means is that, as temperatures increase over time, the impact will be higher. Whereas on a scenario of a 2-degree has a relatively low impact on GDP, a 4-degree scenario or even a higher scenario does have a real impact on GDP and on our growth. Now, why are these scenarios important to us as an organization, as a company, as Third Eye Analytics? Well, as I mentioned earlier on in my presentation, what we build is an algorithm that is able to read and, first of all, crunch thousands of scenarios and deliver the best output possible for clients to achieve their financial goals under any scenarios. And one of these scenarios, or multiple of those scenarios, could be in a scenario in which we operate at a higher temperature. And this is important because we optimize the client on an individual basis, and obviously to try to recreate every single client situation in the most realistic way possible, you have to analyze millions of data points. And this is what we do, and this is why we build these scenarios that can incorporate climate change scenarios or not. We obviously make this system available as a digital tool, and I'll show you later on a little bit how we have been able to bring this algorithm and the power with which it calculates to something that can be used by clients or by client advisors. I mean, these scenarios consume a lot of data, as I mentioned before. We take 2 different data approaches. One of them is the historical data, where we basically look at index returns for various different asset classes. We take data from the usual suspects, so MSCI or Refinitiv. So we take the data for historical purposes, whereas when we look at the future trajectory of expected returns from different asset classes, we look at consensus data, for example, from Capital Economics and from many other data sources. So there is a lot of data that we have to consume here to build those scenarios. All in all, we tend to work between 1,000 and 5,000 possible different scenarios, and these scenarios contain data related to return and risk expectations for different asset classes, and also interest rates, so all sort of macroeconomic data. Now, obviously, once you have collected this data, you have to calibrate your scenarios. So the more scenarios you build, the better outcome you will end up with. As I mentioned before, we can work up to 5,000 scenarios. Obviously, the amount of data that we end up with is vast. As you can see here is one example. It's just a screenshot of the time series that we develop for each of those different market scenarios across all the different asset classes that our clients, financial organizations, do actually provide advice to their clients on. So it could be equities, it could be bonds, it could be infrastructure. They define, we construct those scenarios, collecting this data series and incorporate it into our algorithm. This is what we did. So here you have an example of one case on the left-hand side where you see no impact of climate change, and then right-hand side where you see the impact of 2-degree temperature increase. You see that the impact on various asset classes is relatively large. And once we have constructed these scenarios by consuming this vast amount of data from different data providers, what we do is try to digitalize it. By digitalizing it, we have created a piece of software, various applications that do incorporate this type of, or consume this type of scenarios to provide these realistic outcomes for clients so they get the best advice possible under any possible circumstances. So here you have a little bit of an schematic of our product. We have built a product in various modules that all together provide a full advisory process for our clients. So without further delay, I mean, this can be prepared. Obviously, the user has to consume it in an easy to use format. That means that we have created various apps for people to say, okay, well, I've been talking about this climate change, but what does it actually mean for me personally? And this is also what we have been working on. So try to make a user interface that people like using, playing with, but actually help them take an informed decision of what they should do in terms of either mitigating or adapt to a climate scenario in which temperatures increase. Now, if you can play this video, I'm not going live, just I didn't want to risk that we don't have some internet access here, but you know, you can see here how the video is played. Here we have an advisor interface. An advisor is providing investment advice to the client. The client has certain assets. Those assets can be liquid, but they also could be a property, like you can see here, real estate or even gold. There is also credit. So this is the X-ray situation of a client today. We can also model the expected cash flow coming from retirement. So first pillar, second pillar, or third pillar. You can also see what the client wants to achieve with his money. Wants to retire having 7,000 euro to keep his quality of living. You see that the client can achieve that, although there is a small gap under the worst case scenario. But he also wants to buy a Tesla, so he's convinced about climate change, wants to mitigate by going electric. You see that he can still achieve that goal. But what happens if we play a 4-degree scenario? Well, you probably couldn't see much of the change, so let's compare the two charts. So one by side, one to each other's by side. You see that the steel is green, but he has to take more risk to actually achieve the goal of the pension under a 4-degree scenario. Again, this is a practical example of how these scenarios have been put into a user interface, so the client can actually immediately see, you know, what the impact of these rising temperatures are for me. Now, if we move to another interface, this would be a simpler interface for a user that is playing around on herself rather than having a client advisor. So we have here a female user, 45 years old, retirement age 67, life expectancy 84. She expects to get 919 euro when she retires. But obviously, this can be different if we operate under an increase of temperature scenario. So let's run a 4-degree increase scenario, and then we'll see what happens. Well, actually, what she will end up with is 443 euro, which is probably totally undesired. So let's run a 2-degree scenario, perhaps more likely. You can see still that the 1,000 euro that she wanted initially is still not achieved. That means that, as I mentioned before, the profile or the appetite for this person to achieve the 1,000 euro has to be increased. Again, it's a very simple way of visualizing and combining these two topics of climate change, bringing it up into a digital format so people can actually work with it. We've been talking about this adjustment of someone's investment style. So you have to take more risk to achieve what you want to achieve in life, but you can also mitigate. That means that you can shift your investments from a non-sustainable to a sustainable way. That means that we also crunch data. We as a company, we do not have a specific view on what sustainability is or how sustainability is defined. We leave that to to our clients to define what sustainability means for them. And what we do again is bring the data that is required to deliver on the financial services definition for sustainable investing. So here we work with various data sources. One of them is Morningstar, Fundinfo, Financial Express, Fundinfo, MSCI, or even the UNPRI. So what we basically do is through our interface, we collect data from these different organizations as we have API built connected to them, and then we grab that data and then we display the sustainability of the specific investment recommendations to the client, so the client can again make an informed decision on how the investment should be shifted from one way to another. Now, there are many different items that we can collect and consume as data. So here you see some examples of exclusionary or even ESG investing approach, or the impact of transparency. So again, depending on who do we work with or who do we consume data from, these various topics will have different outcomes. Again, we are connected to a number of them. Obviously, the challenge or what we would like to do going forward is to connect to as many data sources as possible. But of course, I mean, one of the key challenges that we will probably address later on is the quality of the data. How do you access the data? But this will be a different topic. Now, this is a typical file that we will receive from our clients. So it's a simple Excel spreadsheet, all the styles. So what we do is try to populate it with sustainability data as required by them. And what we do then is digitize it. Yeah, so basically, again, this is an advisor interface. The advisor is providing advice to the client. The questions about how would you like to invest your assets. It could also incorporate, as I mentioned before, sustainability topics. So do you want to shift your investment from a ecological point of view or exclude weapons? Again, we are connected directly to the API of these research providers. And what we do next is to show the recommendation output. So basically, if you want to define an environmental tail or exclusion of weapons, this would be the best product for you. We also access different investment documentation, and we also get even output about the quality of the fund, the transparency, how much is it going to cost you. And again, this is a direct feed of information flowing from our interface to the data provider's interface, and then we populate that information on the fly. And this is thanks again to the data crunching that we are able to do using cloud computing technology. This would be how we have, in a practical way, connected these two megatrends of, in the first place, the topic of digitalization of financial services organizations and climate change. How can you actually show to clients what this is about, what the impact is, and how they should be dealing with it? Again, you can see here on your screen that we did it in the form of an application, but the amount of data that we have to crunch behind is substantial to create those scenarios where there is unfortunately lacking a lot of data. But obviously, as we go into the future, more data should be available and the quality of the data will improve. But also at the same time, how these research providers covering sustainability topics are now exposing the data into APIs and other forms, so it is easier to consume for us and build investment recommendations that are fully tailor-made to clients on the fly. And with this, I would like to thank you all for your attention, and I hope you enjoyed the presentation and that I was able to convey the message of that these two megatrends definitely go together hand in hand. Thank you.
Yeah, Rodrigo, that was extremely interesting. How important is technology for you? So GPU-based processing, the cloud?
Well, I think it is probably the core of our company. Let's not forget that we are a software company, and in the end, we need to process vast amount of data. And I think one of the major challenges that we had to overcome was the actual speed of calculation. When you are offering this type of applications, clients do not want to wait for minutes until the the calculations are finished. And remember that I mentioned before during my presentation that we have to build all these time series. We can even run up to 5,000 scenarios. You need a lot of cloud computing to actually deliver a response within a couple of seconds. So what we do is play around with a number of scenarios that we actually want to calculate with to have a faster response to the client via the user interface. So I think this is one of the key challenges that we still face, but we've been able to manage it in the right way. But yeah, certainly cloud computing is one of the key topics for us as a company to be able to deliver these solutions in probably no time. People's patience is relatively short.
So you use the cloud technology for your global clients, or where is your client base coming from? Is it typical Swiss or European?
We have European clients, and we host here in Europe, but again, we are cloud agnostic. Today we work with the Microsoft Azure Cloud, but our system is designed in such a way that you can, in a way, deploy the whole service into other cloud providers like Amazon Web Services, or it could be the Google Cloud, and this could be done in various regions of the world. So not necessarily in Europe, but it could be here in Switzerland, or it could well be in the Asian region. So we have designed and prepared the system so we are able to mimic this or translate this calculation power not just in Europe, but also elsewhere at the same speed.
Okay. Well, I guess you haven't developed that within 2 or 3 months. So what was the biggest task you had to solve?
Well, I think the visualization is one of the key topics. I think the modeling is something where we were already strong at the beginning, but visualizing the impacts of those scenarios and try to bring it in the most realistic way possible and in a playful manner to the end client was the main challenge. I think this is an ongoing work. You never stop working on this, but certainly this is one of the key challenges. How do you represent the output? Is it a chart? Is it percentages? What do people really understand when they look at it and they form an opinion right away? I think this is one of the key challenges. And definitely on this topic of climate change, we are moving into this direction. And I think, I haven't seen a tool similar to ours that is able to tell you, well, if the temperature increases by X, this is the impact on your personal wealth. Because people say, well, yeah, the temperature is increasing, so we have longer summers, that's great. But when this starts impacting your wallet, I think people should start realizing that this is serious and this is here, and you have to act. And I hope, with the example that I was able to show, people get the impression that we've been able to at least show it in the first place. This is working in progress. There is a lot more to be done on the model and many other ways, but I think the visualization should be there already so people actually say, well, actually, I have to do something. Now I understand that this certainly has a financial impact, not for someone else, but actually for me.
So you are analyzing a lot of data. I think you have all predictions for the future. I really hope that you still can sleep very well, because I think the figures don't really look that good. Thank you very much for being here. It was a pleasure. It's a very interesting topic. It's a lot to do with mathematics. It's something which every one of us sees and feels. Yeah, if we talk about the weather, but climate and weather, there are a correlation for that. So thank you very much. It was a pleasure having you here.
Thank you. Thank you for hosting me here.